Hey guys, so the 80s were weird. I'm going to talk about the 1986 movie Short Circuit, directed by John Badham, starring, let's see here, Steve Guttenberg, Ali Sheedy, G.W. Bailey, Austin Pendleton, and Fisher Stevens. I'm going to have to get back to Fisher Stevens here in a bit. So, anyway, the plot of the movie is Steve Guttenberg plays a roboticist who is working on soldier robots for the military. One of the robots, number 5, gets struck by lightning and gains sentience. He runs away. He's found by Ali Sheedy. Ali Sheedy thinks he's an alien, and hijinks ensues. Okay, so the way I'm going to approach talking about this movie is start by saying what the movie is and what the movie was probably originally supposed to be based on some of the notes that I've found online. What the movie is, it is a goofy sci-fi comedy. Think Not Quite Human, those movies. Think And You Thought Your Parents Were Weird, both of those Disney movies. The only thing it's missing is Alan Thicke. It's kind of silly. It's kind of, it's fun. There are some dramatic elements to it. That's what it is. So if you haven't seen this movie before and you're wanting to watch something that's family friendly, more or less. There's no the violence. There's robot violence. There's violence on robots. There's a little bit of coarse language, but there's no sexual situations. There's no gore, nothing like that. So it's a movie you can watch with your family and it'll be fine. Okay, and it's well acted. Everyone in here, they bring it. They're good. So what the movie was supposed to be, the thing that stuck out to me with the notes of this is something that Austin Pendleton said. So he's in the movie, and he apparently is friends with John Badham. They went to college together, and he said when he originally wrote the script, he described it as being beautiful, and the relationship between Ali Sheedy and Steve Guttenberg's character, it was supposed to play out differently. In the movie, Steve Guttenberg is supposed to be this kind of socially awkward nerd who's so focused on his work that he doesn't have human connections and isn't good at human relations. But it's Steve Guttenberg being charming Steve Guttenberg. So even though he does come off as a little awkward, it's still a 1986 Steve Guttenberg. And he's very likable and he's good looking. And then you see him with Ali Sheedy and you're like, of course, there's two good looking people that get together. And I think the original script was supposed to more play on the whole kind of awkwardness between these two. Ali Sheedy played that a little bit. She can kind of tell she doesn't get along with people necessarily the best. And she probably likes animals more than people. But so it's a little bit in the script, but not completely. Also, I think the original script was supposed to get into more in the nature of what it is to be alive, what it is to be sentient. And there's this moment in the movie where Johnny Five essentially kidnaps Steve Guttenberg, who is his creator, and has to convince him of his sentience and explain to him that his sentience is not just this accident that should be fixed. That it's a miracle and it's beautiful, and that's actually a pretty nice scene. But I think that was supposed to play out more in the original script. I guess think more like the episode, the Next Generation episode of Star Trek, Measure of a Man, where Data has to prove that he's a living being. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Fisher Stevens element of the movie. So originally, Bronson Pinchot was supposed to, and I can never get his name right, but Bronson Pinchot, he was cast in this role. If you don't know who he is, he was in Beverly Hills Cop, and really well known for being in the sitcom Perfect Strangers. So he couldn't do the role, schedule conflict or something. So Fisher Stevens came in. And they didn't plan on Fisher Stevens. They didn't plan on the character being Indian. I guess John Badham, the director, thought, well, wouldn't it be funny if there was kind of like a culture clash between his character and Steve Guttenberg's character? So Fisher Stevens was like, I'll grow a beard, I'll wear makeup to make my skin look darker, and I'll play Indian. And Fisher Stevens has spoken about it since then. It's not his proudest moment. He's like, well, I wasn't, we weren't meaning to make fun of Indian people. And if that movie were made today, there's no way I would ever do that. It would, of course, get an Indian actor. And he says things were different in the 80s, which sounds like an excuse. But I mean, my series of movies are the 80s, what do I call this? The 80s were weird because they, there you go. Yeah, so when he says it was a different time, look, this is the same decade we had Soul Man. I mean, what can we say? My biggest complaint about it, though, and I'm not Indian. I mean, of course, I have my opinion about white actors coloring their skin or playing other races. Not saying that it's always, I'm not blanket say never acceptable. I mean, Robert Downey Jr. did, and it was, freaking great. My biggest complaint, though, is that, and this is going to sound like a weird complaint, is that it's actually a good character. Like he's actually funny and he's interesting. And just to show how interesting the character is, and I'll just kind of get into it, there was actually a sequel to this movie, which I'll never probably talk about, but I've seen the sequel more than the original. Steve Guttenberg and Ali Sheedy didn't come back. They didn't reprise their roles for that. Instead, it's Fisher Stevens and Michael McKean is in the movie. And I kind of like the sequel more than this. And I'm not the only one. I mean, not saying that, not to ride their coattails. Siskel and Ebert gave the first one 2 thumbs down. They actually said the second one was better. And I kind of agree with them. Both gave them 2 thumbs up. It has more heart. I think that element of the awkwardness which Steve Guttenberg was supposed to have, his inability to connect with people. It's like the character that Fisher Stevens plays from the first movie to the second movie is almost a completely different character personality-wise, and you see that play out, and he has a romantic interest. And that's something's kind of in an 80s movie where the Indian guy, the Asian guy, where the Asian guy is interested in women, and he gets the woman. And, even now we have this thing of having the non-sexual Asian man, and this is 1988, and he's like, no, he gets the woman, and he's interested, and he's even in the first one he's horny. Unfortunately, it wasn't an Asian man; it was a white guy playing an Asian man. So I guess my biggest complaint is like, man, it was actually a good role, and I wish an Asian actor had gotten it. That's my biggest complaint with it. Not that the character himself was offensive, but I'm not Indian, so I mean, my opinion on that doesn't, it'd been nice to see an actor of color get the role of playing a character of color. So the movie it was made for $15 million and made almost $41 million domestically and about 100 million, I think, worldwide with domestic. And apparently most of the money went into the creation of Johnny Five, which when you see it, Johnny Five is essentially a puppet. There is no CGI and there's no stop motion or anything like that. So you can see it really holds up, and at least I think it holds up. They've talked about remaking this movie. I think the worst thing about remaking this movie is if they did, they would probably do it as a combination of practical effects and CGI. And my feeling about CGI, I know in some cases it's very useful. It's a good thing when you have limitations, but when you can, I'm going to quote, I think it's the movie critic Chris Cabin who says this, to have actual light hitting an actual object, there's nothing better than that. So if they remake this, it'd be nice if they did it with puppets, but I think it's going to be the same thing they did if they remade the Gremlins movie. I'd be afraid they do the same thing, CGI, and it's just going to look kind of like trash. One other thing, kind of random, is that so this movie has the number one song, "Who's Johnny," and this is something interesting. Apparently, that isn't in the soundtrack. It was just a single that was released by Debarge. It's the only number one single that Debarge had after he went on a solo career. I just had to mention that. There's a music video to it, "Who's Johnny," and the song is in the movie, and Johnny gets his name in the movie from hearing that song. Anytime I can mention Debarge in any talk, I will, because I'm a huge fan of Debarge. I just am, like, I just really like Debarge. I mean, it fits the it's in the movie. So I'm not just randomly mentioning Debarge. But I just like Debarge. I think 50% of the reason I like the movie The Last Dragon is because of Debarge. And the other 25% is probably vanity. And then the other 25% is probably the fighting. Well, show enough. It's vanity, show enough, and the Debarge song in that movie. Anyway, to wrap this up, I'll just say if you haven't seen this movie, watch it and watch the sequel. If this is my comparison, this movie's Babe, Short Circuit 2 is Babe Pig in the City. This one takes place out in the country. Short Circuit 2 takes place in the city. This one was appreciated. The sequel wasn't appreciated, just despite it actually being a pretty good movie. Anyway, there you go.